I want to conclude this discussion. Thank you so much for the participation. I want to move into the panel discussion now, where we're going to just, kind of jump off what we started for these 40 minutes and put this and go in further depth. So we have our partner organizations who specialize in these very areas related to politics, international relations, and research. So talking to them and learning more about this discussion, I think that was the intention of starting off with the activity. So let me just spotlight all the people we have. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, hello everyone. We have four amazing partner organizations today. We have Lochan from Kuviraa, we have Avery from Access Academia, we have Lily, Lillian, and Sajan from Youth Peace Symposium, and Alexander from Civic Writers. So, to begin off, can you all just introduce your organizations really quickly and your mission? So, we can start from Lillian and then Avery, Lochan, Alexander, that order. Does that make sense?
Sejin is actually going to introduce us if his internet is working.
Okay, cool. Go
Yep.
ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so YPS, the full name is Youth Peace Symposium. It's a student-run nonprofit organization that started in China, Shanghai, but currently is working as an international organization. And we aim to kind of create a platform for young people across the world to discuss and research topics on international relations and political science. And we believe that creating the symposium can foster a lot of those open-minded generation, the younger generation of international relations and political scholars. And some of the things we've worked on, I guess this might be a bit long, but just to introduce some of the things that we do is YPS Review. So it's our own journal where the members of the organization write their own articles and providing their own perspectives on international and political issues. So we currently have around 30 articles that are published in our website. And the topics include from human rights to economics, history, and domestic politics. The second one is YPS Forums, and this is an online discussion where we have one of the members of the YPS Forum department give a presentation on a topic they want to discuss, and then it's an interactive discussion with the other participants where they share questions, concerns, and kind of also include case studies that they've researched on. Another one is YPS Podcast, where we just recently launched our own podcast series led by our president, and it's about the stories of immigrants around the world. Another one is YPS Chapters. I think this is something that can be expanded to India and other parts of the world too, but it's a sub-community composed of people from the same country. So we currently have a chapter in Singapore where students in Singapore come together and share their researches and interests on international relations and political science. And we're also planning to start one in the United States. So yeah. And then the last one is writing competitions. I don't know if any of you guys have participated in our competition, but we recently had a writing competition where we received about 100 submissions of essays about a conflict they want to talk about or any other international relations topic. And yeah, those are some of the things that we've been working on. And yeah, I kind of said a lot, but
no problem.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, YPS, I'm actually a volunteer at YPS, so I know the work they do, and I genuinely admire you all so much. And I've been following you all for a while, so it's so nice to have you all here as, partner organizations. Now, I want to introduce Avery. Avery, like all of us are high school students. I know Avery is a bit older, and I think the insight that she has is really, really useful. So everyone listen up. And I know Access Academia used to be a journal for intersectional social justice. So I've also been following them for a long time. So I want to hear a little bit about that and how they're, kind of having a new image and what the future plans are, what the initial mission is, everything. Come on out. Come on.
Yeah, so I'm basically like the forgotten generation. So I'm 23, so I'm not millennial or really Gen Z. I kind of straddle the benches a little bit. I'm not just out of high school. I'm actually just out of my second master's degree from the University of Cambridge. So I have basically channeled a lot of educational experience and toiling in the trenches of education for the past years of my life into an organization. So my organization is a registered charity. We're actually just submitting our charity registration documentation in the UK, which is very exciting. It's a very long process if anyone is interested in ever doing that in your life. It takes a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy. But yes, so Access Academia originally started as a student-led organization and product, which is the Journal of Intersectional Social Justice, which I started in my final year of my undergraduate in 2021. And this project basically ended up expanding to different kind of like ideas and ways to essentially interact with different concepts. Because we were platforming the journal in like social media spaces and in like social activism spaces as an entity. And then it very quickly sort of became apparent that if we want to essentially achieve more, you have to scale up the organization. So that's where the charity registration came in. And for our mission, it's kind of self-titled in our name in Access Academia. The charity is basically taking the mission of the journal, which is to essentially reach students internationally and collaborate with students across sort of national boundaries and also sort of internationally social stratified boundaries. Because one reason I ended up starting the journal is because I didn't really understand in my undergraduate studies why I couldn't access and why I essentially wasn't allowed to collaborate with peers, academies, institutions that were non-Western. So I've done all my higher education in the UK. My undergraduate degree was in ancient history. And a lot of the materials I needed to access and I wanted to use were from Iranian institutions because I studied Near Eastern studies. And I couldn't access any of the materials, and my institution basically told me that that was the way it was going to stay because they were not going to request any sort of like collaboration or access with any of the Iranian institutions. Which was sort of a shame to my dissertation. It made me kind of question. I mean, there's obviously a lot of reasons why they implement and keep this sort of boundaries, including things like colonialism and stuff, especially from a country like Britain. But that made me kind of prompt this idea of the journal. And that's been kind of like our centralizing factor ever since. Especially because I'm an international student myself. It's been really central to the mission to essentially have an international approach in getting students involved in understanding academia, accessing academia, promoting research. So one thing going forward, especially this year, once we get our charity registration, is we're going to be implementing research workshops and research symposiums for students, which is basically one part of it will be walking students through research projects. So creating independent research projects and then producing an outcome at the end, which will go into a special edition of the journal. And then another aspect is going to be collaborative mentoring and like supervision sessions. So we're basically creating a network internationally of students and academics from different institutions. So for example, if you have a group of students here at Cambridge, they would be able to be mentored by an academic, for example, like from Peking University or another university in a non-Western country, basically to foster cultural collaboration, different understandings of research and academic processes, which I also went through this summer with like my summer exchanges and stuff like that. So yeah, it's kind of imbuing a personal mission to reach internationally as an international student and support other international students, and also basically get students involved in academic research, because I think that it's interesting that a lot of the discussions today have touched on participation. That's kind of the one thing that also lacks a lot in academia, and the relationship between basically what people know and what they're able to act on in the political sphere. So that's also a part of basically what we talk about and what we promote in our workshops. So yeah, that was sort of long-winded, but yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. So yeah, we will share all the links later, but I admire the journal so much, and basically I'll talk a little bit. I'll ask you about intersectionality because I think that's so important. We were discussing the middle class, and as the person who made the scenario, I understood very early on, like we cannot talk about the middle class as a whole. There are so many identities involved within the class, within young people, within the seasoned politicians. There's an intersectional perspective we should have. There are so many identities. We just do not have a homogeneous identity ever. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, Avery. Thank you so much. Lochin is an ambassador, she was a summer ambassador and a volunteer at Kuviraa, which is also an organization I am volunteering in, and I admire them so much. So Lochin, can you just introduce Kuviraa to us?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Sheena. So Kuviraa is basically, it was founded 3 years ago, and the organization is a non-partisan initiative, which basically aims to empower young girls to enter politics. So some of the work that Kuviraa has been doing is their main mission is to empower girls, and they did a research study very recently, where what we found, we did a research study to understand the opinions of youth about why women are not as represented in the parliament, specifically in the Indian context. And the research gathered about 600 plus responses, and it was done with in collaboration with UCLA. And this so I'll discuss some of the findings later, but the idea, the point of the research was to basically understand why women are not being represented, what are the factors that are hindering them from being participating in the parliament, and what we can sort of really do about it. Besides that, the report was actually recently launched, so you guys can go check it out on the website. But also, other than that, there was a Kuvira's ambassador program where basically I was part of it, and Sheena was part of it as well. But there were a group of about 15 young girls from across India, and we were exposed to, like, over the course of about 1 or 2 weeks, we were exposed and we got to interact with different people in the public policy sphere. So these could be politicians, or these could be even other organizations like Kuviraa, who aim to empower youth in politics. And so it was very interesting, and the idea is to empower girls essentially, and they've been doing that through different ways. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, thank you, Lochin. Yes. So Kuviraa again is amazing, and I also assisted in the research study. So some of the findings were just genuinely bizarre. So we will come to that in a while. So Lochana and I were both, research volunteers for that. So it was very interesting. So now I'll move on to Alex, who is representing Civic Writers. Can you introduce what your organization stands for? Go ahead.
Yeah. So my club is Civic Writers. It's Canada-based club. So I started this club because I was inspired by the Vote 16 movement happening in Canada. Basically, they're trying to lower the voting age in Canada from 18 to 16. And then I thought that's a really good idea. So I started this club. Not like mainly in support of the Vote 16, because that's kind of still up in the air. So instead, I focus on kind of raising political awareness, kind of just like what all you guys do. So basically, my club allows people to write articles about like whatever issue they feel interested about, because I feel like whatever issue that other people like teenagers feels interested about, like it could very well be a similar interest to other teenagers. It's probably more likely. So we will publish these articles, and then in hopes that we would get like more political awareness in the country and internationally. And yeah, we're a pretty rudimentary club with more to come.
Okay. No, I think the Vote 16 movement, the reason why I had the case study thing was I was I was reminded of the Vote 16 movement. And I was making, when I was in the case study, I was thinking that should we change the parliamentarian angle to the voting angle? Should we say that 16-year-olds are now allowed to vote? I think that would have also been interesting to debate out. So, and basically the common theme with all the organizations that I admire and I thought of inviting was that all of them are just about IR, politics, and centered around a youth perspective by college students or high school students. So that I really admire. So now I'm going to go back to YPS, and a question I have for you all is about the YPS review and the research that you all do. And how do you think research can actually translate to something more, translate to social impact? Like, what is the importance of research? Like, people will write articles as much as they want, but where exactly does that lead finally in the grand scheme of things? Any of you can answer.
So, YPS, we don't do a lot of our own research. I mean, we do internet research and that type of thing for our articles. And what we focus on for that is making sure we have accurate information. We really focus on ethical journalism, and making sure that we represent our ideas in a way that is not super biased. Like, we want to make sure that if we are writing opinion pieces, we make it clear that they are opinion pieces. And we want to make sure that when we enter spaces, that they are safe spaces for everybody to be able to discuss freely, and not feel like they are going to be trampled upon because of their opinions one way or another. In our discussion forums, that's something that's important. And sometimes we are more careful about which articles we choose our members to write. Like, article topics are approved beforehand that we send in, which, like, a couple of different things that we're interested in writing about, and then somebody approves which one you write for a certain period of time. So that's one way that we make sure that our organization kind of is a welcoming space and is a well-informed space for everybody. But that in itself has an impact, especially in this age of misinformation, and everything that is going on with the media.
Right.
Like, having that space where people can go and read something by youth that is for youth, that is checked for misinformation, that is cited properly, that kind of thing. Having those spaces. But in my personal experience, in clubs outside of YPS, I've seen like actual physical change happen from research I've actually done myself, not just like from internet research. I was in a club called Community Leadership Building, and we polled student responses on how inclusive our school was, basically, in like its culture and its curriculum. And our research then made an actual impact in our school community. As a result of what we did, our school started using more, it started to use more youth voice. It started more programs. Sorry, out of breath.
No problem.
I have asthma, so talking a lot is not always great for me. Um, there were more programs that involved youth voice in administration after our youth-led research project. And then also there was an anti-racism policy that was built along with youth involved, and some other projects are still going on. So that's something not related to YPS, but something that I've seen like actual social change happen. I know that a lot of people here have some really valuable research that's going on and is still ongoing. And you are working to make the change. But that is something that I've actually physically seen the change. It's on a much smaller scale in my little community, so it's a lot easier to see the change happen quickly, because it's just within one school system and not within the whole world. But it's nice to see those little changes happen. So
Definitely. Yeah. I think we cannot like expect overnight change. So that's like the lesson of the day. But totally. I'll jump to Avery now about intersectionality. And I think I'm genuinely personally very fascinated by this. I'm not sure how much of a common concept it is. So I would like you to like take a few moments to explain what that means. I'm sure there are people who don't know. And also, if you want, you can also just answer this question about what the importance of research is and maybe the importance of intersectional research. And yeah.
Yeah, so the reason that I ended up obviously titling the journal Journal of Intersectional Social Justice, I actually kind of started like my own sort of like political activism and kind of like political understanding when I was in university. I didn't go to school in the United States, even though that's where I'm originally from. I went to boarding school in the UK, and I went to an international school, which was interestingly devoid of politics when I think back on it. Um, like there wasn't really any political activism in my high school days, mostly because none of us were a part of the political system of the country that we lived in. And that kind of delayed, I think, a lot of like my sort of social thinking until a little bit later. So when I was in university, and during the like height of the pandemic, I started working with Diversify Our Narrative. If anyone's from the US, or you guys might have heard of them before, it's started by a group of students out of Stanford. And they basically do a lot of policy advocation and research, which is what I was initially involved in. So that's where my concept of intersectionality came from, and also from my own personal experience. Because it wasn't until 2020, with all the protests in America, that I was sort of confronted with any kind of experience of intersectionality. A lot of times, like when I discuss like my personal background and my educational experiences, I always platform intersectionality because I think that it's one of the most important concepts to understand not only where you're coming from, but how you also interact with others, which is something that I ended up learning on a basic scale in high school, at like my international school, but it wasn't something that I think I conceptualized until a little bit later. So to give a brief definition of intersectionality, and kind of like a background on it, intersectionality is a concept originally pioneered by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an academic in the US. I believe, I don't know if she's still at BU, she used to be at BU. And so she conceptualized intersectionality in a seminal article, which was looking at Black women in a working class experience, in a working class environment, and basically how these women were not able to unionize and how they were receiving less salary, and also poorer work conditions than their peers. And this study, she's a lawyer and a law professor by trade, looked at the legal repercussions that this basically had on the company, on the women, because they ended up suing and they won. And Crenshaw introduced the concept of intersectionality to explain how these women's experiences in this particular company were colored by race, were colored by their gender, by their class background, And it's the intersection, so the crossroads of where these things meet, in which people end up experiencing different aspects of life. And this obviously colors the actual social realities and the social facts that other people face at any given time.
Mhm.
So that's kind of a brief introduction to intersectionality. I'd say for social research, I agree also with what Lillian said. I've also seen like social research impact on like a much smaller scale. I've done research for Dawn on like education policy, which is implemented, and also preventing certain education policies from being implemented in different states. And like those bills have not been passed and things like that. Or for example, with like AB 101, with Dawn actually successfully passing the ethnic studies bill in California, which is now a state requirement for high school students to graduate with an ethnic studies module. So yeah, I think what Access Academia is seeking to promote in that aspect of social research and through intersectionality is allowing students, and for basically a generation which is more privy to current social issues, to have an opportunity to do their own research projects and actually create those small scale impacts themselves. One thing about social movement sociology and social movement theory in general is that it only takes a certain minority percentage to all at once basically do small acts to actually make any sort of social change.
Right.
So that's kind of like the idea that we're sort of approaching, especially in the academic sphere, which is one which is seen as very closed off and not very intersectional and not very sort of accepting of a lot of intersectional identities.
Mhm.
That's kind of like I would say as like the main commentary on, at least from what we're trying to achieve for social research, and also kind of like a real time impact of what it means to acknowledge intersectionality into research in an international or intersectional perspective.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. I will be, sending all the links so you can read up about some of the work they've actually done, the, intersectional research. But yeah, that's super interesting. Lochen, tell us a little bit about your experience in working at Kuvira's research, and how exactly was that, at the intersectionality of like gender, age, and politics.
Yeah. So working on the research study was of course like absolutely fascinating and very interesting. Because first of all, I was part of the Kuviraa analysis team, qualitative analysis team. So whichever open-ended responses we got from the survey that we conducted, I was evaluating that. And so we went through a very rigorous qualitative process. So first, we looked at the responses. We tried to categorize those responses into different codes, as we call it. And so some of the code examples could be, some. So one of the questions was, why do you think there's so just a fun fact, there are only 14% women who are currently there in the Indian Parliament. And so the question was to the survey respondents that, why do you think that's the case? So a lot of people responded in a lot of different ways. So some of them responding with, just general patriarchy, general misogyny. Others responded with saying that there's not enough there are not enough opportunities for women to actually enter politics. Others responded by saying that we don't have a lot of the times there are a lot of traits which are associated with women, especially when they enter politics, such as, especially in leadership positions. They're either too sensitive, they're too emotional, they're not assertive enough, or maybe they have household responsibilities. So we categorized them, and then we looked at how different, like whether boys responded differently from girls. So some very interesting findings we found out was that a lot of the boys, we noticed that responded by saying that they found that the reason behind women not being represented in parliament as much was because of women's individual choices, and because of their lack of interest or their lack of motivation preventing them from doing so, or their lack of interest in politics, right? Something we were discussing before in one of the activities. However, women mostly focused upon, like girls usually focused upon how the societal or the systemic barriers actually prevented them from participating. So even among women, even among the girls, like we saw a pattern of how younger girls usually were very ambitious, and they were all like, if we work hard enough, then we can actually like be part of politics and nothing's really hindering us. But as they got older, we noticed a pattern that the girls were more pessimistic, and I guess we associated this with their exposure to, say, media, or exposure to sexism overall. And we noticed that because of their exposure, they realized that they were very pessimistic, and they were not they kind of felt helpless, and they didn't really feel like entering politics, because they didn't think it was really worthwhile. Because even after joining politics, there was a pattern of showing that they're either not taken seriously, or men try to gatekeep opportunities from women, right? So a lot of very, very interesting findings from this. And the whole process was definitely very overwhelming, because there are a lot of new things I found. And there's also like when we're doing a qualitative research survey, we find that we can't really detect the tone. So it was really hard to really understand some of the responses that we were looking at, and to actually divide them into different codes or categories. But and also different interpretations of the same response, right? Because when we look at a response, there are many ways we can really interpret it. And another interesting finding we were looking at actually was the fact that we actually found that girls usually responded a lot, like in terms of the literal word count. We found that the girls actually responded a lot more compared to the guys. So the girls were clearly more passionate about this, which is unsurprising. But even when the guys responded, or even when they had very strong opinions, they responded very few words. So it was very interesting to sort of look at. But yeah, these are just some of the findings, a lot. But I think overall we just found that girls seem to be less interested in politics from a younger age, and they also consider themselves less engaged in politics. And yeah, I think I've been going on for a bit too long, but these are just really passionate about this, especially just because I am a girl also who's interested in going into the politics sphere. So yeah, that's about that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, totally. It was genuinely like I was also analyzing the responses. Like I think one person, anonymous person, when we asked them like, why do you think women are only represented 14% in the parliament? They're like, they literally said 14% is enough. And I'm still not over that. But yeah, Lillian, do you have a question? Go ahead.
I just had a little comment that I thought might be interesting to you guys, since it's kind of related to what you had been reading through with your responses. I read something recently that really stuck with me, and I think it might stick with you guys with what you've been reading through. What I read said, it's interesting how the excuse that girls mature more quickly is never used as a reason for them to be in politics or positions of power.
Right.
So it's used for so many different things. Like it's a reason for them to do more house chores, or to forgive people quicker, and those kinds of things in a lot of situations. But it's never considered a reason for them to engage in more intellectual pursuits. And with what you were talking about with different barriers and different like societal reasons for like women to not be in politics. This was just something I was thinking about while you were talking through it, and I thought you might find that interesting. But your research is fascinating. It was making me think of like the differences in the responses of the research that I went through, and it's so cool that you did that. Thank you for sharing.
Of course, thank you so much for that insightful like quote. Yeah.
Certainly. Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, Alex, I know you mentioned the Vote 16 movement really quickly. I want to ask, how do you think young people can engage with politics according to you, according to the Civic Writers' message mission? And sorry, what was that? The Civic Writers' mission, and just kind of defy what it means to be too young or too immature. So, just your perspective on this topic.
Yeah. So I think from my experience, like connecting with politicians are honestly really easy. Like because every city you live in, you got you know there's like representative of like politicians for different parties, and then you kind of just choose like a party with like similar ideology. Then you just go contact that guy, and then yeah. So during the last Canada voting season, I actually volunteered for one of the politicians. He
Oh,
didn't get elected as like the MP for our region, but it was a lot of learning experience. He was a he was a he's been politicians for like 40-ish years. He was really knowledgeable, and like talking to him, like regardless of like the outcome, like it makes you learn a lot. And
right.
yeah, I think that's like the easiest way to get to like kind of get connected in politics. Then once you start getting to these connections, you can like find a party to join, and then you go through some stuff in your party, and then you can start like working.
Right. You make
Yeah.
it sound so easy, I swear. But no, that's really cool that you actually worked with a politician. I think that's like a dream for a lot of people in that sense. Like in India, it's definitely very inaccessible. Like you can send emails and all, like we don't get responses like that. So I think that's really cool. Okay, now I'm going to open the floor for some audience questions. I have a few more questions, but I think we've been speaking for quite some time. So, audience members, if you have any questions about the organizations that they're leading, or any general questions about, how to start, what to do, like how to get involved in politics, anything that you want to ask, now is the time. You can raise your hands. There was a lot of conversation on the chat. I'm sorry I had to disable the chat for a few moments because I think that this conversation here was more interesting. So I was a little sad you all weren't concentrating here. But now you can raise your hands and let me know. Anyone? Okay, I'm going to move on. So I have a few questions. This is for, anyone who wants to answer about what were the initial obstacles when you were starting the organization or when you were working in this organization? What were some initial things that came up? So, we can have like everybody can mention like a few things really quickly and we can get into some advice for our audience members. So the floor is open. Anyone wants to answer?
Yeah, I'll go.
Go.
I
Go ahead.
mean, yeah, when you're starting a club, it's like starting everything. You feel you kind of just a lot of times you don't think enough, and then you start doing one thing. For example, you start building a website, and then you realize your idea doesn't really work, and then now you're back to rethink your idea, and then you realize you forgot your building your social media page. So a lot of times it's just realizing that you kind of have to do everything,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's gonna be like a long process before like everything kind of just begins cycling and kind of have a bit more free time.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Was it?
I know that
Yeah.
Lily, you're newer to our organization, but I think that you had some ideas about some barriers to youth-led organizations if you wanted to add.
Yeah, so it's me and Sejin have a few ideas on this. So first of all, a few barriers is like we talked about before, the idea that youth can't engage in politics, or the idea that we can't be taken seriously, or that we shouldn't, our opinions are less valued because we lack the life experience, as we talked about earlier. And I think like a part of YPS and a part of why it was so important is because it provides a platform for people to be able to voice that. So I think a barrier can be the idea that you can't enact change. But I think that, the fact that we're all here right now is proof enough that we can bind together, and by restricting and limiting and telling people that you shouldn't be allowed into a space, just like what Locking said with women and being entered into the political realm. The idea that you should be blocked out of that was a barrier for us to overcome, and is not something that we would want to encourage. So it's really important, and it was just amazing when I entered. The idea of being welcoming and receptive to all sorts of different opinions and different ideas, regardless of background, regardless of culture. Yeah, they're absolutely wonderful over there. And it's been an amazing experience for me. So yeah, as much as that's been a barrier for our organization, they have been working tirelessly to overcome that and to ensure that everyone feels safe, that people can express their ideas and actively engage in, people that don't agree with them, people that, as the discussion panel we had earlier, people that really push back hard. So having like a place where people can engage with that and actually receive that and push back on ideas, or figure out how they want to respond and what they believe in truly is something really important. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the audience members, do you all have any questions about, how to start an organization or how to just build your team? Because those were some questions I myself had. So if audience members are, interested in perhaps starting their own research projects, I think nowadays, for high school students and just, yeah, Pratyusha, go ahead.
I actually had some network problem while Avery was speaking. So she mentioned something about independent research that she helped publish or something for a journal. So could she please repeat that part, like if that's possible?
Yeah, so also just to quickly comment, because one thing that has been like the hardest barrier to entry, and I think that also with like student publishing, based off of also like what Lily just said, is legitimization. So when I started like the Journal of Intersectional Social Justice, it's always meant to be something that kind of pushes back against the ivory tower and kind of approaches publishing from a different perspective. But the problem is that like academia is such a closed space that like you have to go through the official channels, and it is so hard. Like it's not as easy as just, oh, you need a website, and oh, you need something to publish on this. There's so much that goes into behind it, like from the actual publishing platforms to the peer reviewers to the adminning of like the journal and like the bureaucratic structure. Like it's a lot to take on at once, and like without it there is less value placed upon your work. So the independent research that we promote at the journal, I personally haven't published any of my work at the journal, mostly because I don't think I necessarily have written anything that speaks more to the ethos. But the Journal of Intersectional Social Justice posts independent research, and also we publish courseworks. So central to the actual mission of the journal and our publishing is basically putting value on the work that university students do. So when you produce like a coursework, when you produce a research, or like especially when you produce, like a dissertation and things like this, they're usually just sort of seen as steps along the way. Whereas the journal is more trying to legitimize student thought and student academic processes from start to finish. So we publish undergraduate work, we publish postgraduate work, but we do only publish university students in the journal. We do have a high school equivalent, which is called Intersections. It's more of our casual sort of blog publication that we're also revamping with our transition to becoming Access Academia. So that is also something which will be launching basically this year and quite shortly, if anyone is also interested in publishing anything as a high school student. But yeah, so that's where like we publish independent work. And this year we'll also be running workshops. So from start to finish, we'll help students foster research ideas. And then those will be published as in a special edition of the journal. So that's part of our like programs and outreach. So it's going to be like a program that Access Academia will be running to help students produce their own independent research ideas.
Right. Yeah, James is asking about the information. Yeah, so we will be compiling like post-conferences resource, like a document with all the links of the organizations and various opportunities and team positions available. So not on the chat, James. Avery, if you like have the time, maybe you can copy paste the link right now. But after this session, I will also be compiling all the links. So don't worry. Sakshi, do you have a question? Go ahead. Sakshi, are you here? Yeah.
Yeah, so my question, like we briefly discussed it with the panelists yesterday also, about the funding issue. So are you guys going through a particular funding process, or you're individually putting your resources? Like, do you have any grants or anything? So yeah.
I will start with that. So basically, YPS is going through a major funding crisis sort of situation right now. We are currently doing a lot of research on ways to get more money because we are running out of funding relatively quickly. We have done some scholarships in the past, but we don't have any grants. So with our organization in particular, it's really hard to get grant funding because we don't have any adult advisors at all. And usually you have an adult that helps with grant writing and also with legitimacy to make you seem more reliable to whoever is giving you the money. So you don't just like disappear with their money and that kind of thing. But also we are an international organization and there are not a lot of global opportunities for grant funding. Usually it's like location based. So there are grants for people in Massachusetts and that kind of thing. So grant funding isn't really an option for our organization in particular. I've done a lot of research on that topic myself. So technically there are opportunities, but we don't have the manpower to like try to get through that whole process. Grant funding is really time consuming and complicated, and it's not really an option for our organization as is. So we look for scholarships, and we try to do fundraisers. Right now we have a writing competition going on, and late submissions, they have to pay for their article to be submitted, that kind of thing. So we have like little ways for money to trickle in, and we're looking for more ways for money to come into our organization. But right now we are just like doing the best that we can with as little money as possible, which is really hard because we have to pay for our website domain. And right now we are going like without a proper Zoom account because we can't afford it. So basically we just send 2 Zoom links. So our Zoom, after 40 minutes, it just like closes out and then we have to start a new Zoom because we don't have a like an official, like we wouldn't be able to do a meeting this long. We would have been kicked out by now. So things like that are hard for us, but right now we're working on different ways and brainstorming new ideas. We have a new finance manager who is working on that. We have a whole new executive team. I am the new head of events. Sejin is outreach, and then Lily is my lovely deputy, and we are all relatively new to the executive team, and we have all of that organization starting now. So hopefully we'll be able to get more money into our organization. But as youth, that is something that is very difficult, and it's very difficult for a lot of people. And like, obviously we're not getting paid. It's a nonprofit organization. Some people in nonprofit organizations actually can get like small stipends and that kind of thing. But that is not the case for our organization. None of the executives or members get paid anything for their participation. It's just like a voluntary opt-in kind of process. We're just doing it because we love it and we're having fun. And Ning Ning, our founder, is probably in the minus actually running our organization because she's paying for the domain and that kind of thing. But yeah, we're doing the best that we can with the money that we have. But yeah, it's very, very difficult to get money into our organization because of the complicated situation and because we cannot get any grant funding. But we're trying.
Definitely.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment because I feel that like way too hard. Like that's just way too relatable. The I'm also paying for like our like web domains and like stuff like that. One thing that was actually like I'm not even gonna lie, it was a huge factor in like the pursuit of charity registration. Like I had to make like an executive decision of like this project is going to essentially like die, like we're not going to be able to do the things that we want to without money, and that's just like a capitalist nightmare scenario of like just the reality that of the hellscape that we currently live in, that none of us can find any money to fund any of these projects. So that was honestly like probably the number one reason why I decided to legally register the project, because and it makes sense a little bit because obviously if you're not a legally registered like entity, then like no one will give you money because there's obviously different legal recourses that grant makers and things like this have to go through to basically make sure it all circles back to like legitimization, because if they can't legitimize you as an org in like a legal sense, then like they won't give you any money because they essentially think that you'll just run away with the funds. And it's really hard, especially like when you have so many ideas and you have so many projects that you want to do, and there just really isn't money to scale it up that way. Charity registration has given us the opportunity to apply to a lot of grants. That's basically what I'm going to be spending a lot of my time this year doing. Also, just as a word of advice, it's very difficult to retain long-term finance and grant personnel in nonprofit sectors, because in my personal experience, none of them like the idea of not being paid, which is fair because they have spent a lot of money on their education to become certified finance professionals. But that's been a massive issue in regards to building a team, retaining a team, having like a forward vision. Is people also have to be willing to commit to the cause, and that can be kind of difficult when you don't find like-minded people. And that's just another thing regarding, it's kind of it's a different kind of wealth that a nonprofit organization has to retain, is basically people who are committed to furthering your cause and to committing to the work, no matter how long it takes to get paid or if they get paid at all. Personally, like with the charity, in like our scaling up plans, I have plans to give like our staff members stipends. So we operate what we've registered as legally, just as like a brief note, if anyone is ever interested in registering legally as a legal entity, we're registering legally in the UK as a charity entity, which is called a CIC, Charitable Incorporated something. That's the UK registration, and then in the US we'll also be pursuing a 501c3, which is like a nonprofit status, and this gives you basically access to retaining grants and applying for grants and things like that, from basically like non-educational or government bodies. So you can get it from private investors, so like organizations which give grants to charities and things like this. So yeah, that's just like as a side note, if anyone decides to pursue legal status, it takes a lot of time, it's a lot of bureaucracy, and you have to realize that you also have to change the internal workings of the organization. So like with Access Academia, we have like an executive team as well, like our senior staff, but they will get paid, they will be legally contracted and signed employees of a charity, so they will receive a certain amount of salary, they have an employee contract, and then our organization then runs off of volunteer. So we have student volunteers which operate in across like all aspects of the charity. And those are something which I also would like to give volunteer stipends for. Basically is also like an acknowledgement to students who are putting in the work to actually make the charity run. But yeah, finance is a huge issue, because another thing that I really would like to do, and when I talk about this project, is I always talk about my grandiose vision of like what the peak idea of accessing academia would be, and it's finance. Because my grandiose vision in like the current post-capitalist nightmare hellscape that we live in would be to give scholarships, like with basically no strings attached, to students to be able to access education in multiple different countries around the world. And that requires a lot of money. And trying to find that money and trying to, I mean, first of all, finding it and then getting someone to agree to give it to you is incredibly, incredibly difficult. So yeah, that like finance is like that's my current position right now in leading this project. That's just, yeah, it's a lot, and it's a lot more than I think people realize, even like when they volunteer their time. Yeah, it's a lot. And people also, like when you volunteer for an organization, by the way, like the people running it will toil over the fact that they cannot pay you. It's not usually that they don't want to pay you, it's that they can't, like they literally cannot pay you. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think everybody, like every non-profit worker or leader can relate to the Zoom thing about the free Zoom, and oftentimes resorting to Google Meet, but then Google Meet also having its, fair share of, things that just come out of nowhere. Like you think Google Meet is nice, but then you can't record. So there's just so much that goes on, and you need money for everything. But yeah, thank you so much for raising that question, Sakshi. And yesterday we talked a lot about grants. And, for those who weren't there, Ananya, who was one of our panelists yesterday, she received a very interesting grant of like, I think, $1,000 as an Indian, organization from a global thing. And how she was talking a little bit about how that didn't necessarily help the organization. That actually added a lot more stress, because she couldn't even use that money for the things she needed, because there were so many other things in the, the fine paper of what you can, what you cannot do with the money. And how, like, as a high school student with $1,000 just in your bank account, in your parents' bank account, like, it may seem like, the pinnacle of success and legitimacy, but it actually just added more stress. And she emphasized upon building a community over those $1,000, and how that really just didn't matter at the end of the day. That did nothing. So I think that was just a very interesting conversation. And today was also even more interesting. I feel we delved into more controversial topics, and it was so nice having all of you. Does any audience member have any last questions before we conclude? You all can raise your hands. But I just want to say that today's panelists were so amazing, and I loved learning from you all. And all the organizations that I reached out to are organizations I personally admire, and I genuinely wanted to hear from them. I wanted my fellow audience members to hear from them as well. And thank you so much for joining Youth Fest. It was such a nice event of 2 days, and maybe from next year we can have like a week-long 3-day event, maybe having a lot more organizations, a lot more partners, a lot more attendees. I think that's how I envision this entire event. And I just want to thank my team members also who put this to life, and some of who are in the meeting, some who aren't, but it was a collective thing. We also, the Teenage Lens, we have literally not earned a single penny. We launched as a podcast in 2021. We have worked with no money. It's me asking my dad to pay for the website every now and then. That's our financial model, guys. And it's been very effective until we don't know when it's gonna work. So we don't even talk about that. So thank you, Dad. So yeah, that's our financial model. But thank you so much for joining in. It was so lovely speaking with you all. Any last thoughts, anyone? Anything you want to say before we conclude for the morning, night, afternoon?
I would just like to say thank you all for listening. I hope that you all enjoyed my slight rambling. I have a tendency to say some random things at random times. While I get off topic very easily, let's just say that. But I do want to say quickly, later on when the materials are sent out, you'll see some information about positions that we are recruiting for. We are always looking for new members, so if you guys are interested, you should send in an application. I would love to get to know some of you better, and hopefully that will happen. And Serena, I hope that I will be seeing you again. It was lovely to meet all of you, and hear about all of your organizations, and interact with the attendees. It was a very interesting panel. This is my first official event as head of events for Youth Peace Symposium, so it was very exciting for me and for Lily, my deputy. So I'm glad that things went well, and it was really lovely. I hope that I will be able to maybe work with some of you soon. So check out the information that Serena sends out later.
Yes.
She's worked really hard for this, guys. Give her love and appreciation.
Thank you, Lillian. Thank you. But yeah, any other last thoughts? It was so fun having you all and just hearing from. I'm more interested in your organizations now. So yeah, stay tuned. I'm gonna be sending the post-conference resources very soon. But yeah, if no more, Avery, do you want to say something? You want me to?
Yeah, I guess just to echo sort of like that sentiment, we also do our recruitment isn't starting until probably the end of next month. So we operate on an academic year timetable. So once the new academic year starts, we'll be recruiting for all of our volunteer positions, particularly our content creation team. So if anyone is interested in sort of like research and content creation, those roles will be opening. Those have been our like most popular roles, like blog writing, content research, like creating like Instagram posts, LinkedIn posts, things like this, managing like our social medias. And then we also have other things like marketing, finance, all this kind of stuff. Those are all going to be launching at the end of September. So yeah.
Okay, amazing. So yeah, thank you so much. Also, the teenage dance is also, we're always looking for volunteers. Yeah, Lily, go ahead.
One thing just to add about YPS, because we also have the forums like Sejin talked about discussions about different political conflicts. If you really enjoyed like earlier today, like the active discussion about like our different views on like youth-led types of things or youth in like politics and that sort of thing. If you're open to the idea, please come and attend, follow our Instagram. You've got like all of the different conflicts and everything, or different issues and you know, inequalities in society. And so if you're really passionate and you want to voice things, make a change, educate other people, then yeah, go for it and sign up. And thank you, Srina. It was an amazing experience, and it was wonderful to see other people that are really successful and are really cool. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everyone. Have a great evening, morning ahead. It was so nice having you, and we will see you next year for Youth Fest 2024 and other events. So stay tuned, follow us on Instagram, and we will send the resources soon. Bye bye, everyone.